You are dust, and to dust you shall return. These are the words from the 3rd chapter of Genesis in the Bible. The astronomer Carl Sagan once said, "We are made of star stuff." And the poet Jennifer Perrine, who you heard Aaron read this morning, says, "Each one of us is a mote of brilliant dust." We often hear these words or words like this on Ash Wednesday, observed in the Christian tradition this past week. Being marked with ashes is a reminder that ashes, dust, and dirt, the stuff we walk on and work to get rid of often, is also what we are made of. We are smudged and brilliant. This is what makes us human beings, both imperfect and beautiful. This year during Lent, our church is delving into our Unitarian Christian roots by adopting a Lenten practice and exploring what are usually called the 7 deadly sins. It's not something you hear Unitarian Universalists talk that much about, sin and deadliness. While pride, wrath, envy, lust, sloth, gluttony, and greed may be deadly for our relationships with one another and with God, admitting that these sins have a role in our lives is not necessarily a reflection of low self-esteem or base immorality, nor is it meant to cause shame. Most people, if we're really honest with ourselves, can identify these tendencies, these lively sins woven into our humanity. Oftentimes, we do not embody them intentionally. Instead, in going about our lives with the best of intentions, we simply miss the mark. We may not intend to be prideful or envious of others, but our love and desires become misdirected. When we reflect on this not to shame ourselves and one another, but rather in a context of growth, it is a healthy spiritual practice. So in these days of Lent leading up to Easter, I invite you to join me in looking at ourselves in the mirror honestly, confronting parts of our lives that diminish our relationships with other people, that prevent us from truly practicing our faith in community, and that separate us from the ground of our being that we call God. I invite you to join me in a practice in which we let go of what's not working for us and embrace virtues that promote healing and growth of relationships. This may involve giving something up, as is often the case during Lent, or taking on a new practice, or both. Whatever you do, know that love is alive in you and in all creation, and that we rest in that larger love. Statements such as "you are dust, and to dust you shall return," or "we are made of star stuff," are humble reminders that we are part of something larger, that we are connected to the universe and to each other in spectacular ways. These calls to humility are why we begin Lent with an exploration of pride. When we talk about pride in a Unitarian Universalist church, there's usually a rainbow flag involved. I preached on this September on the day that we marched in the Dallas Gay Pride Parade. When a community has been systematically denied a healthy pride, as many oppressed groups have, self-love is an entirely appropriate and needed response. Pride is a necessary antidote to a history of shame for many LGBTQ people. Pride can also be healthy when it leads people to do excellent things, to do well in school or at work, or to make groundbreaking scientific discoveries. Pride seeks excellence. When you take pride in your work, that's usually a good thing, and it means that you will do well. Pride can go too far, however, when the drive for excellence becomes the drive to be the best. Sometimes this leads to great accomplishments, but other times it leads to a deeply unhealthy self-absorption and self-righteousness. This kind of pride says, "I am perfect, I am invincible, I am superior in looks and knowledge, and therefore you should listen to me tell you about all the things that I know." Do you know people like this? I know I do. Do you know people like this? Raise your hand if you've ever taken a selfie. Raise your hand if you have no idea what a selfie is. Well, we heard a little bit about it in our story. A cell phone camera-fueled phenomenon in which, instead of asking people, hey, can you take a photo of me? We snap photos of ourselves in the bathroom mirror, at concerts, in restaurants, on vacation, on the street, in church. Look at what I'm doing and how good I look and how excellent my life is. And I must share this with all my friends and followers on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. Now, I realize that selfies are not the most harmful expression of pride, to be sure, but I think they indicate a shift in our culture of relatedness. My wife and I traveled to the Northeast last summer, and when we were looking over our photos to find some good ones for the Christmas card in December, we realized that nearly every photo of the two of us was a selfie. The summer of selfies, we started to call it. Aside from some less than flattering angles in these shots, what struck me was that we didn't once, surrounded by people, ask someone to take a decent photo of us. We didn't take the time to connect with others in that way, whether they were friends or strangers. The Reverend Hope Wells Jernigan, an Episcopal priest who calls herself a recovering perfectionist, points out that on social media, the land of a million selfies, we tend to post only our prettiest, wittiest, funniest, and most professional versions of ourselves. When her brother died, she shared her grief on Facebook and received an outpouring of support. But she decided she didn't want to burden her friends with her sadness, so she stopped posting about it. She reflected that Facebook, it seems, is not always the place for our rougher edges, our sorrows, and our imperfect moments. She realized that the message she was sending, both as a friend and as a pastor, was not giving people permission to make mistakes, to suffer, or to have messy lives as we all do at times. So for Lent, she has started a communal spiritual practice on Facebook called Lent Unedited, a daily discipline of posting about our messiness, imperfections, and ugly moments, a season of sharing our real selves with one another and letting grace shine into those hidden places. She realized that pride was getting in the way of her being authentically in relationship with others. Maybe we need to take selfies more like the one you saw on the screen more often so that we can avoid taking ourselves too seriously. It's often easier to recognize pride in other people than it is to acknowledge it in ourselves. But during Lent, what we so often easily find in others, we acknowledge deep within. We're not immune and we're not alone. It's part of being human, something that we share with billions of others on this earth. Ben Franklin, in his writing on sin and virtue, says, "In reality, there is perhaps no one of our natural passions so hard to subdue as pride. Disguise it, struggle with it, beat it down, stifle it, mortify it as much as one pleases. It is still alive, and will every now and then peep out and show itself. For even if I could conceive that I had completely overcome it, I should probably be proud of my humility." At least Ben was honest with himself. Pride is considered by many to be not only one of the most difficult of the 7 lively sins, but also the root of the other 6. Dante, the Italian poet of the Middle Ages who wrote extensively about the sins in his poem Purgatorio, suggests that all of them arise from love, misdirected or deficient love. Pride, for example, is love focused exclusively on the self, exaggerating one's importance, perfection, or excellence. Now, the line between healthy self-love and hurtful pride is described, I think, very cleverly by the theologian and author Frederick Buechner, who says, "Pride is a sin when instead of leading you to share with others the self you love, it leads you to keep yourself in perpetual safe deposit. You not only don't accrue any interest that way, but you become less and less interesting every day. Pride can be very, very lonely. It's lonely at the top, as the saying goes. It seems odd then that people would cling to pride, something that makes them so lonely. Being lonely and fabulous is considered better than being common to some. The problem and the difficulty, I think, is that pride is rooted in very valid desires that are simply pursued in a misguided manner, at the wrong times and places, or too intensely, or at the expense of other important things and other people. Pride is rooted in the desire to feel worthy, to be heard and seen, and to be loved. These are common longings, and the pursuit of these things doesn't have to separate us from others, as pride does. In fact, these longings can be satisfied in relationship with others, relationships where we know that we are worthy of love. As Unitarian Universalists, we say that every person has inherent worth and dignity. Every person is important. Some of us find it hard to sing the hymn Amazing Grace because we can't stand to sing the words, "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me." We're sometimes out of touch with our wretchedness, the ways in which we need each other and a grace that is beyond us. The spiritual challenge then is for us to balance this sense of our importance with a sense of humility, knowing that although we are worthy, we are also imperfect and part of a larger interdependent web. Now, as much as I love our Unitarian Universalist forebears, they didn't always help us much in the pride department. Thomas Starr King, who brought Unitarianism to California, is known for describing us this way. He said, "The Universalists believe that God is too good to damn them. The Unitarians believe that they are too good for God to damn." Not much room for humility there. We also have a theological strand in our heritage that says our fate and the salvation of our world lies in human hands alone. Such a belief leaves little room for forces that are beyond our control, such as nature or grace. It suggests that we humans are the be-all and end-all and not part of something larger. Pride says it's all about me, whereas humility says I'm part of something larger. Both of our readings this morning get at the complexity of pride and humility, two sides of the same coin, neither an absolute sin or absolute virtue. The passage from Romans conveys a message repeated throughout the Bible, that true faith is not demonstrated through showy rituals, but rather by how one lives with others, humbly rather than haughtily, doing justice and loving mercy rather than engaging in elaborate sacrifices. Attempts to be humble before God too often became signs of pride, and hence these passages. And Jennifer Perrine, the author of the poem we heard earlier, says in reflecting on that poem, "Any experience I can remember or imagine that might speak of sin can easily mutate into one that also embodies virtue, and vice versa." And this is what she wrote about so beautifully, a glittering, prideful parade that allows her small, humble self to realize its place in the universe as a mote of brilliant dust. Just in that last line, there contains a series of contradictions, a mote, a tiny, seemingly insubstantial particle, brilliant, yet made of dust. A couple weeks ago, I attended a program at a church in Fort Worth, and I came across a postcard about that church's Lent and Easter services. Across the top, in big letters, it read, "Good soil, good seeds, good news." What a wonderful way of thinking about the Lenten season, I thought, and what a wonderful way of approaching sin and virtue in this reflective time leading up to Easter, the day of good news. This made sense to me as I thought about how to navigate pride and humility or any of the other lively sins and virtues. Good soil. That is the dirt, dust, and ashes. Now, when something is soiled, it's considered dirty. But soil is also natural, the stuff of the earth. It nourishes and provides an environment for growth. To me, this is a helpful way of thinking about the 7 lively sins. They're not the most wonderful parts of ourselves, but they are natural, and the roots that grow within them can nourish new life. Good seeds. These are the virtues, such as humility, that we plant and cultivate within the good soil. And finally, good news. Our pride need not be a source of shame or cause for damnation. Reflecting on our prideful tendencies, learning from our mistakes, and embracing humility, this is all good news. It helps us to connect with the ground of our being and with one another. May our creaturely limits and passions serve as good soil in this Lenten season. Let's dig our hands into it, get a little dirty in the process, and plant some good seeds. And then see what practices, what relationships, and what new life grows from within it. May it be so. Amen.